Hello, everyone, the officials, latest edition. And my dear colleague over there says that the price is 74, 74.45. Mr. Trump just took a little bit of a nudge, or shall we say a dump, on the oil price, saying he wants low oil prices. I mean, we really feel sorry for the longs. They are not listening. The man wants low oil prices. Maybe one day he says, I'm going to apply maximum pressure on Iran, but he suddenly says, maybe not so much, not military action, not yet, and I want lower oil prices, and the prices collapse. So here we are in the what has now become really the center of the world, the center for energy. Anything that comes out of Washington is affecting the price. And those emissions there by Mr. Trump are highly, highly bearish for the market. So let's pay attention. The other thing that we need to take into consideration is we are, believe it or not, still in the middle of the Chinese New Year. Dr. Wu over here tells me that the Chinese New Year, which started around January 28th, still goes on until February 12th or something like that. He's like, what's going on with this thing? Just goes on and on. Well, I'm enjoying it. I'm going to have Chinese dinner with my family and friends. It's a great time. But let's see what's going on. We are in the middle of a trade war. Trump issues like an executive order a minute and has essentially punished verbally Canada and Mexico, but then he changes his mind very quickly. We are going to talk about that later. But all this thing is just creating world instability. And what that has resulted in is, and we're just going to put it very plainly because that's the kind of person I am, in Trump becoming a joke. So we are showing you a few memes of what we mean. We don't create the memes, the market and the aggregate issues it. But as an advice, I think Trump needs to take it more seriously, otherwise he won't be taken seriously. Whatever strength he had at the beginning, it will diminish. Already many nations are countering what he's trying to do because he's trying to do too much too quickly. There's a benefit in doing too much too quickly, but you need to think about the consequences of what you do. I am going to now go into the studio to sit down with my friends and colleagues to discuss this situation far more directly. And to also tell you, as you admire the sunny or blue sky a little bit here in Britain, in London, that is very cold here. And also from what we read and see, it's extremely cold in Japan. So this winter, it still has a lot to go, huh? And this means kerosene and heating oil are still bullish, even if the price of oil as a whole is still very bearish. So please bear with me as we head into the studio. Thank you. Okay, here we are coming into where we have a lot of fancy equipment. I don't know what it does, but I am sure you will enjoy it. So, hello everyone. So let's start the second part of this episode. Hello, Mr. Harry Potter and don't be, what is it?
Dobby.
Dobby. Just kidding. It's Will and Ed who will be talking with me in the episode today. So I will start in the general framework of the most important things going on here. And the most important one is that Trump is in full form, acting extremely quickly. Some people could say rashly. Issuing executive orders, tariffs, threats of tariffs a minute. And he has taken some concrete action. He tariffed Canada and Mexico for a brief moment, and then he took it down. He threatened to tariff Colombia, who folded very quickly. What are your thoughts on that, on this really rush of tariffs?
Yeah, well, it was clearly a lot of waving the stick, and he'd been egging up the idea of tariffs for quite a while, all through his campaign. And then he got into office, and I feel like he needed to show something. He needed to actually take some decisive action. So he decided to hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs, and 10% on Canadian energy, also 10% on China. But very quickly, there was a resolution and no tariffs anymore, or at least delayed until the 1st
But
of
only
March.
on Mexico and Canada.
Yeah.
And my take is that several refiners in the US, Valero, Marathon, Phillips 66, they need the oil.
Yeah.
And when you implement a tariff so quickly, material is already in transit. And it becomes extremely complicated as to who's responsible to pay the tariff, but normally the importer. So I'm sure the refiners in the US were screaming bloody murder. And that was one of the things that pushed down the takedown of those tariffs. And for Mexico, so many assemblers, and in Spanish it's called maquiladores, which are essentially producers of stuff that then gets half finished or fully finished that goes to the US, then the car manufacturing industry, everyone else would also be screaming bloody murder, and they did it. But Ed, you were going to add something there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the response to the tariffs has been quite diverse between who's doing it. So Europe, for instance, has rolled over and said, yeah, you do what we want. We'll buy more of your LNG. We'll buy more American stuff to appease you. Colombia tried to resist the deportation of migrants, folded within a few hours. That was a bit of an embarrassing episode, really.
Yes.
But yeah, I think the Chinese response is probably the most impressive one, because they've stood up. They've said, okay, tariff us, we'll tariff you straight back. They put 10% tariffs on crude imports, and then 15% on coal and LNG, and then a load of agricultural machinery as well. And they've really just gone face Trump and said, okay, what are you going to do?
Let's explore this a little bit. The US tariffed China as it said it would. China responded within hours. And here is the list, everything what we are going to do. And critically, they tariff oil. If you put a tariff, an extra payment of 10% of the price of oil, it will never be commercial. Like never. So what China said is, your oil, Mr. Trump, you keep it. It's all for yourself. We have other sources and we have other ways of coping with this situation. But from a game theory point of view, the US has been holding a stick of, I will restrict the supply of my oil that you need on you. And what China did is they just did a run around and said, you keep it, we don't need it. And then we felt that this was going to cause some market impact. We get into the discussions, dear viewer of these reports, we try to figure out what is the impact of these things. Number one, and we really keep it simple because that helps. If a country is tariffing a product coming into you, the price of that product in your country will go up. So that means that TI or anything energetic in the US relative to the outside, when a tariff is really put in place, rises. And then the price elsewhere should decrease because there is more competition. And this has resulted in dated Brent doing what?
Yeah, so we've recently seen a pretty aggressive weakening in dated Brent structure, and the Brent structure more broadly. So like front spreads, for example, in January, they peaked at about $1.50 a barrel. Recently, they've traded down to around 50 cents now. The physical window has also been very offered. We've seen the likes of Gunvor and Equinor coming out and pushing cargoes in.
Particularly been a lot of Midland cargoes this week.
Yeah.
One after the other, all in the window.
So yesterday, Totsa bought a Midland from Gunvor at plus 50 cents. That's a CIF cargo. And Unipec also bought a FOB 40s at minus 30 cents. So we're seeing deals done in the negative here.
So that means dated Brent is under.
Yeah.
And in theory, anybody who had a position that counted on Midland going to Asia just got smacked.
Yep.
And needs to now find another location for that oil to go, whether it's into Africa or into Europe itself, but it will be offered down. And that is precisely what is happening. So we try to tell you, reader, in the officials that these things are happening. We are not aiming to tell you that we are great forecasters, what we are market observers. And we just use logic to say if this event is happening, it's likely to result into this. So we have taken really two very public attitudes in recent weeks. First, we were bullish the flat price. We changed that 2 or 3 weeks ago. We remain negative on the price because tariffs slow down world economy. The total world GDP will be worse than it would have been without the tariffs. And if there's a growing tariff trade war, it's even worse. So that's negative. We thought that the structure in Brent would worsen, and we thought that TI relative to Europe would increase. We will see, but that's where we are. And then we have other events taking place. One of them is that the data, and we need to always be ready to change a position, mental position. Just to make it clear, we hold 0 positions in any market whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So we are just observers of activity. But one of the things that we start to factor in our brain is what is happening in China. What do you guys see there?
Well, I mean, what's really obvious to me at the moment is Chinese households are traveling a lot more. So in Thailand, for example, of the nearly 4 million visitors that have entered this year so far, over 700,000 were Chinese. For the 2025 Spring Festival travel season, saw airline passengers trips jump about 6.74% year on year in China. So yeah, people are flying a lot, and that's typically something you don't do when you're strapped for cash. You know,
yes,
that's a bullish signal for disposable income. But it's not just airline passengers either. Road travel's been up as well. So passenger trips are up about 6.7% year on year.
And that means even if they are so big on EV that they are, that gasoline consumption has ticked up.
Yes.
Already.
So I mean, as we've discussed at length, EV penetration is accelerating, but still the overwhelming majority of the vehicle stock are gasoline vehicles, about 85%. So this is again going to be bullish for Asian gasoline demand for sure.
Yeah. So we're factoring these little bits on our spreadsheets and in our brains about what they mean. So right now we're still bearish.
Yeah.
But if at some point the recovery in China is so significant that it changes the line of travel, we will tell you. Not quite there yet. So the world is trying to reset in many ways. And we were hoping that the US would grow massively, but the tariffs put a little bit of a dent. We were hoping that the liquidity infusion in China would accelerate their growth again. And we would hope that Europe essentially decides to forget the nonsense that they have been doing in killing themselves in energy and with sanctions and do the right thing. So where are we right now? The Chinese seem to be doing the right thing in terms of reigniting their economy. The US is creating trouble wherever it can, and I think that's going to, they're still going to grow, but not as much as they should have. And Europe, who is really flat on its back, is finally showing signs of wanting to do the right thing. While they continue to concede and bend over as low as they can against the US, they're already changing some of their position on carbon.
Yeah, we've seen that perhaps, for instance, in the Equinor earnings release the other day. They've said that they're going to wind back some of their renewable investments in this coming year to focus on the more traditional energy that's really driven their business before. So there is this change in sentiment. Total Energy seems to be doubling down on the renewable investments. So we'll see perhaps a bit of a case study there, which one rises, which one falls. But
you know which stock to sell and which stock to buy.
You've got a good hedge. But both of those have had a terrible time with the refining margins last year. They were, both of them had their reference refining margin in Europe down by more than 40% from 2023. So they need to update their business strategy.
Because Europe is doing very badly. But remaining on the carbon front or renewables, Ørsted also recently fired the CEO, I believe, and made major changes at the top of the organization, and is also cutting back down on investments. So there is a little bit of a change where China is growing massively. Just to give you some figures, last year China added more renewable capacity in electricity than Germany and Britain together have as a total electricity capacity. Imagine that. In 1 year, China adds more than these two countries have currently together. So at this pace, this is the reason why China can essentially tell to the US, go and sit on a tank. I don't care about what you're doing. And any other issues that we should highlight to our viewers?
Just touch it, just to elaborate on the China point. They have so much spare capacity here that they have very little inflation. So on a relative basis, whilst US inflation is much higher, things are cheap in China. Things are cheap, and they can flood global markets, and you can't compete with that, especially if you're going to be, implementing new carbon credit systems and all of this, depending on renewable energy that sometimes the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah, and on that one, Europe again is trying to do the right thing, and they're saying that about 80% of the companies that were supposed to report something on carbon no longer need to do it. I think they start to smell that the voter has had enough of subsidizing carbon dreams, and what they actually want is a job. So with that, guys, I appreciate your time very much. So we're in the mid 74s. We were looking at the next stop as being 72, the next one that will be fought very hard, and we'll see what happens by the time of the next episode. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.